When James Harden requested a trade from the Sixers, it might not have been a surprise considering he's done this a few times before. It seems as though Harden wants the kind of max money that Philly doesn't want to give him. So the question arises, is he even worth it? Teams can easily find guards that can get their teams into their offense, make the right read, run the pick and roll competently, and hit the three-pointer when it gets swung around to them. Heck, Gabe Vincent just did that for a team that made the NBA Finals, and he just signed a contract for $11 million per year. So what are teams expecting from a guy they're going to pay over $35 million? There really are only a couple of things. Isolations is one, the shot clock is winding down, the offense is stalled. Can this guy manufacture a bucket consistently? The second thing is crunch time. Can this player come up big in close games when they really matter? Now, last month, Harden got piled on for not showing up in Game 6 and 7 versus Boston after leading his team to a 3-2 lead with a hobbled Joel Embiid out there. But was that even Harden's fault? A close examination of these two games revealed a game plan by Boston that exposed very real flaws in the Sixers' attack. The possessions are littered with tons of pick and rolls run by Harden, where at least one extra defender rotated heavily to get right in Harden's way, practically forcing him to make the pass. These were all the right plays, creating lots of opportunities for his teammates to get wide open threes from the corners and long closeouts to attack and make something good happen. With the overload of the defense, Harden wasn't going to force up shots against long defenders in close quarters, and I don't blame him. Part of being a star is using your gravity to make your teammates better. And after enough of these bricks and poor decisions, I can understand why his immediate reaction after the season was, I want out of here. I need to find a better situation where my teammates can help me out a little bit more. Also, if we're looking for reasons why Harden wouldn't even get an opportunity to look at the basket with the ball in his hands, there were plenty of possessions where they dump it into Embiid and let him go to work down low. No one is going to argue with letting one of the best post players in the league get his opportunities. They didn't work out great in these two games, I'm sure adding to the Harden frustration, but we know Embiid was operating on one good leg, which makes you wonder if maybe they should have cut down a little bit on all the stagnant ISOs where the rest of the team was relegated to standing around and watching. But let's get back to analyzing where James Harden is now and whether a team would be wise to trade for a guy turning 34 in August while toting such a huge contract with him. With the ball in his hands and a spread floor, he can still be very dangerous and even a little explosive. I love this through-the-legs jab-step crossover move. Notice how his back foot shortens the stride in order to get to top speed quicker, and Smart was hoping someone else would help him out to no avail. And I'm sure we're all familiar with Harden forcing a mismatch out of the pick and roll, doing a little dance, and then gathering with the left foot down before illegally stepping back to establish his right foot as the pivot, getting this one off over a tight contest from Horford for a nice triple. In the regular season, Harden saw his free throw rate plummet to the second lowest of his career, which tends to make these ISOs less effective when he can't convince the referees that he was fouled, like he does here with the obvious contact of the body on this drive. After all, his specialty was getting into the defender's body, catching him out of position, then shooting with awkward cadences that made these types of calls no-brainers for the refs. However, the game has changed since his MVP heyday, particularly the way they call contact on those drives, and he still hasn't completely adjusted, unfortunately. By lifting his left arm up into Horford's, it looks like there's all sorts of contact, but since the ball isn't in that hand, the refs aren't going to call this anymore. Horford gets his hand out of the cookie jar, Harden is now facing the sideline with no way to get this shot to go in, and the result is frightening. Early in Game 7, his through-the-legs combo gets him a step on Derek White, but he does the same thing, initiating the contact before he even gathers the ball, and ends up turned the wrong way with no other option but to throw it up while falling down. It seems like the NBA simply got fed up with Harden's unique way of drawing fouls and altered the rules to discourage it, yet Harden continues to take a swing and see if he can get the call. Just like you could take a swing at betting Major League Baseball on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right, just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/Boston to get up to $200 in bonus bets, and you'll get great opportunities, just like Harden does here by using his inside foot to slam on the brakes while using a subtle elbow to Tatum's waist to get wide open in the lane, but he's 2 feet off to the right for a bad miss. And with Embiid resting in a 9-point lead in Game 7, he can't get by Brogdon, although there's no spacing anyway with this group, then creates a decent look from 13 but airballs it. He didn't create a lot of three-point shots from his ISOs in these 2 games, but for the series, he could only muster 31.7% on his pull-up threes, a big drop from his regular season production. With StatHead.com, we were able to see how well players shoot when those shots could tie or take the lead in crunch time. And over the last 5 years, we see that James Harden ranks 6th in effective field goal percentage amongst all players with at least 100 of these shots. On a side note, it's amazing that D'Angelo Russell is 2nd in this category, and I'm completely surprised that Russ is right in the middle of all these guys. Good for him. What's fascinating to me, though, was that if we isolate for the playoffs the past 2 years, we see that Harden only took 5 shots in the last 4 minutes of games where he could tie or go ahead, making 3 of them, and all from his past series against the Celtics. Of course, a big reason is that Embiid took 9 of the 23 total, missing 7 of them, and that helps explain why the Sixers haven't been able to break through to the conference finals during the processing era. Does all this mean James Harden is truly worth a minimum of $35 million a year? Considering the new CBA makes it very difficult to have more than 2 big stars on your team, do you want one of them to be a guy who will be 37 on the last year of a contract? He's a guy who still has a lot left in the tank, but also notoriously underperforms in the playoffs in terms of box score production and hasn't been able to lead his team to the conference finals. His career is littered with no-shows in the playoffs that should make any team very wary of tying up that much cap space for a marquee name that may or may not be consistent enough for your team to weather the intense pressure and glaring lights of the playoffs, when that salary is truly earned. Hey sports fans, it's Coach Nick here, and I had to get into this with Brian Toporek, who is a contributor to Forbes Sports and Liberty Ballers, and also used to write for BBALLBREAKDOWN.com, and he's the man with the plan. He knows everything about what's going on with the Sixers, so I had to bring him in. Brian, thanks for coming on the show.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Well, listen, let's break this down right away. First of all, there's some contract stuff which might have triggered why he wanted to opt in and get traded. Can you fill us in a little bit about how that worked and why this is playing out the way it is?
It's unclear exactly what was being offered by whom, or if there were any offers even on the table, because as we know, teams technically can't start negotiating until 6 p.m. on June 30th. Last year, the Sixers got dinged pretty hard for tampering, lost 2 second-round picks, and got a pretty hefty fine. So the messaging from the Sixers side, at least, is they were genuinely not tampering with James Harden this year. We're not negotiating contract numbers. Wanted to wait until June 30th at 6 p.m. Harden and his representatives, according to John Clark of NBC Sports Philly, wanted them to tamper effectively, wanted more finality, or wanted to have a better sense of what Philly was willing to offer. So when the two sides couldn't see eye to eye, Harden instead decided, okay, I'm going to pick up this $35.6 million player option, and that's going to give me more freedom for my next destination. So had he opted out, he could have signed with the Rockets. For instance, they have 60 plus million in cap space. They have more than enough for his max salary, which is tentatively projected for 47.6 million. But it sounds like the Rockets have pivoted to Fred VanVleet and some other targets, so I don't think that was on the table. Other than that, he could have tried to negotiate a sign and trade somewhere. But if a team signs and trade or acquires a player via sign and trade, you get hard capped at the first salary cap apron, which as of now is projected to be about $172 million. So we've already heard the Clippers from basically every major newsbreaker today the Clippers have emerged as, one of the teams interested, if not the favorites, to acquire James Harden. That would not have been possible if he had opted out, because they are so far over the second apron that there's no way they could have acquired him via sign and trade. That's true for the Phoenix Suns as well. If they were interested, Miami Heat, I know Shams Charania mentioned as a possible landing spot for him as well. They're also way over tax line, first apron. They're close to the second apron already. So I think a lot of this was just having more freedom of movement. James Harden looks at the market, realizes, hey, if I opt out, probably Philly or bust. And that gives Philly all the leverage here. I'm going to opt in, tell Philly, hey, maybe we need to find something that makes sense where I move on, you guys get something back. I'm still playing for a contender. And then, if you guys weren't willing to make this long-term commitment, send me to a team that might be.
Well, clearly you're not in the situation where you're willing to get traded or want to get traded unless or if the season we just had gone so smoothly and swimmingly that you'd want to stay. So can you give us any insights into why Harden isn't, in love with Philadelphia and in love with the Sixers and in love with Embiid and wants to stay?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it was a secret at this point that Harden and Doc Rivers did not necessarily see eye to eye. I mean, Doc Rivers went on Bill Simmons' podcast earlier this month and described why it was such a challenge to coach James Harden.
Did you like coaching him? Was it okay? Like, how would you rate the experience?
It was challenging, more because we were fighting two things, and not like visually fighting, is that James is so good at playing one way. And the way that I believe you have to play to win in some ways is different, because it's a lot of giving up the ball, moving the ball, coming back to the ball.
Sure. I mean, I can imagine at this stage of his career and his age that, he wants like maybe the one last contract that's going to really give him a lot of money before he gets to the point where he isn't worth it. Is he worth a max?
No, I don't think so. I mean, maybe you could talk yourself into it on a 1+1. And it's all context dependent and team dependent as well. But I think as we're seeing in this new CBA, with the financial restrictions for the league's highest spending teams, it's going to be really hard to build around three guys on max contracts. So if the Clippers do end up acquiring him and have Paul George and Kawhi on their books as well, it's going to be fascinating to see how they build out the rest of their roster. They have a ton of depth right now, so they might be the one team built to withstand this kind of thing. But it's going to be really hard for them to continue adding talent. Like the supporting cast around them will wither over the coming years, and they won't have good ways to replace those guys. So, James Harden last year averaged 21 points, led the league with 10.7 assists per game, had these two monster games against the Celtics in the playoffs. Like, he's a really good player. And I think, a lot of Sixers fans right now are like relieved, excited, some combination of the two that Harden is not coming back. And, to some extent, I can get that, because you heard some of the numbers being thrown around, like 3 years, 150 million or something like that. This max was 4 years, 213 million. Like, yeah, I would be queasy to make that kind of a commitment to James Harden when he's turning 34 later this year. He's got this long history of playoff collapses. He's had injury issues in recent years. Conditioning has not necessarily ever been like his strongest suit, to say the least. Like he's got his off court, enjoys the nightlife, and maybe you could do that when you're in your mid-20s, but it's harder to do that as someone in my mid-30s. I can vouch it is harder to bounce back from that kind of thing. So I can understand being scared of making the long-term commitment to him. If it's a 1+1 deal, especially if you have the team option or a non-guarantee on the second year, then yeah, whatever, that's fine. But I don't think the market was out there clearly for him to get a big 3 or 4 year max or near max contract.
Well, Brian, I can't thank you enough for coming on and breaking this down. It's always great to see you and talk to you about hoops. So, anything we can expect in the future coming out of from your keyboard?
At this point, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I'll react to the Harden trade whenever it does happen. I did write at Liberty Ballers earlier this week just about the concept of him opting in and what that would mean for the Sixers. So if anyone's wondering why he went that route, I'd encourage you to go check that out. And then we'll see. It seems like it's going to be a busy summer for the Sixers as always.
Well, for sure. Well, thanks to everybody out there. Make sure you check out Brian's writing over at Forbes Sports and Liberty Ballers. And we'll see you soon. Thanks, Brian.
All right. Thank you, Coach.